Hello, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Chloe Lloyd-Jones and I've worked for NatWest for 8 years. Prior to working for NatWest, I studied fashion at Nottingham Trent, and today I am here with Iona Bain, journalist and founder of the Young Money blog. We're going to be talking to some recent grads, Noor, Jean and Lucy, about uni life and what they wish they'd known about money before they started. We'll also answer some of your questions along the way too, so don't hesitate to comment below and ask. Iona, over to you to intro yourself and kick off our session.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Hi, everybody. I'm Iona Bain, and I'm the founder of the Young Money blog, and I'm a writer who looks at personal finance and especially young people in personal finance. But I haven't always been super confident and knowledgeable about money. I actually trained as a musician and I studied music at university. So it was only when I graduated when I realized that there was an awful lot that I needed to learn about lots of things, but particularly money. But actually, when I was at university, I did learn a lot about money. I learned a lot about the value of money and how to make your money last. And those lessons have really stood me in good stead throughout my 20s. So hopefully I'll be able to pass on some of the things that I've learned as we go through this session today. But enough about me. I want to introduce our fabulous graduates, all of whom left university fairly recently. So they're in a great position to give us an idea about what student life might be like this year. Now, obviously, things will be very different for the class of 2020, and we're going to try and keep that in mind as we go throughout this session. But I think there are lots of things that we can talk about that are just as applicable and important for this year's freshers, maybe even more so, because let's face it, we're all thinking much more carefully about our money right now and how to make it last. So I want to introduce our lovely graduates, Noor, Jean and Lucy, and they're going to introduce themselves, but they're also going to answer 3 questions as they introduce themselves: where they went to university, what they studied, how they financed university, and I also want to ask them to use one word to describe their university experience. So first of all, over to Noor.
So hi everyone, my name's Noor and I went to the University of Manchester where I studied philosophy, politics and economics. In terms of how I financed university, I had the maintenance loan that supported me, especially with my rent. But in terms of my own personal spending, I had a part-time job throughout my first and second year of university. And in between my second and third year over the summer, I did a paid internship so I could support myself during the final year. And if I could choose one word to describe my university experience, it would be adventure.
Oh, I love that, adventure. That's going to be such an amazing word for people to have in their minds as they start their university experience. Jean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jean. I studied at the University of Bath, studying politics and international relations. I financed my 4 years at university through maintenance loans and grants, the disabled students allowance, and I also had a part-time job whilst at university as a student ambassador. And one word that I'd use to describe university was very busy.
I completely relate to that. Yes, not enough hours in the day, that's for sure. And finally, Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy. I went to University of Leeds and I studied history and French. Similar to the others, I made use of the maintenance grant and loan to help fund my time at university. But to help top that up, I had a part-time job before I went to uni and then also worked throughout the summers of uni as well. I would describe my university career as exciting.
Exciting, that's great. So adventure, busy and exciting. We've got a fantastic mix of words there, and we've had such an interesting mixed bag of funding and degrees and universities as well there. So it's going to be really, really interesting to kind of get stuck into all of your experiences. So let's kick off with talking about the big expenses that you're likely to face when you get to uni, specifically food, because that is a big one. Now, I'm interested to know, did you all try to cook your own meals when you're at uni, or did you like to go out a lot and get takeaways? How did you guys deal with food costs? So who wants to jump in and answer this one?
So we had a discussion about this around pesto pasta being that go-to recipe. So pesto pasta is a really easy way to make a really quick meal that is pretty much done in about 10 minutes, and you only need 2 ingredients, and it's that jar of pesto and also a bag of pasta as well.
I love pesto pasta. I had it the other night. I mean, it's just great whether you're a student or not. It's just such a great quick meal to cook up. Do any of you other guys have any go-to recipes that you want to share, or is it pesto pasta? Is that the main thing in town?
I think Noel's hit it. Pesto pasta, isn't it?
You can't go wrong with it, can you? But I suppose, like, on occasion, did you guys go out for meals or have takeaways? Were you cooking all the time?
I think particularly late nights in the library, kind of, especially in final year when you're very busy, there were probably kind of more takeaways and kind of quick things on the go. So it was quite important to try and leave some money aside to kind of fund that, as obviously it's more expensive eating out. Yeah,
that's true. Late nights in the library, make sure to take some snacks with you, otherwise, you'll get hungry. Chloe, do you have any wheezes for saving money as well, whilst trying to stay in budget and also eat relatively well?
It's funny, isn't it? Pesto pasta, it's a definite win. And like you say, at university and now after university as well, I'd say, cooking with meat substitutes as well can be quite expensive. But when cooking potentially for a bigger group, so your housemates, for instance, it can be more cost effective. So one of the things that we used to do at university, we would have a weekly come dine with me night. So we'd set a budget of, say, £5, and then we'll score each other afterwards, which sort of puts a bit of fun into budgeting, because it's not, can be a bit of doom and gloom sometimes, can't it? So.
Oh, I love that idea. I take it as well. It was much more peaceful than the TV program.
Yeah, it was.
You didn't all end up having a blazing row at the end of it, like so many of the shows end up. I definitely recommend getting comfortable with cooking as a student. It's going to save you so much more money in the long term than fast food and takeaways, which are a false economy. They will cost you more. And you'll also feel better if you're cooking, because you get to really put your own ingredients into your food and decide what you want to eat and cook healthier meals, which will help you deal with stuff better. So I also recommend checking out local stores that stock global food that might be cheaper than your local supermarket, and get loyalty cards. Make sure you're getting all the bonus points from those, and also invest in a flask. And you don't have to get one of those really nerdy thermal flasks. You can get quite nice ones now, so that you're not getting takeaway coffees all the time. That's one of my top tips. But more generally, when we're talking about money management at uni, how good were you guys at budgeting? Were you in the habit of checking your student account a lot? Did you have any strategies for making your student loan last? No, I think you've got some good advice for us in this area.
Yeah, so before I went to uni, I was awful at budgeting because I didn't really need to budget. Having a part-time job, my most important priority was just funding like my weekends. So moving to uni, you obviously have like a range of different responsibilities: rent, food, bills, all of those expensive things. So one thing that I found that was really useful was just forward planning and making sure that I was forward planning on that. So avoiding shopping in small Tesco Expresses, Sainsbury's locals as well, and making sure that I was going to more affordable supermarkets as well, and planning meals around that. So making sure that I wasn't just purchasing loads of different ingredients that I didn't really need. I can tell you that the first food shop I did, about half of it I didn't really use. So just making sure that I was like planning around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, food waste is really hard to avoid, but you are absolutely right to try and plan your meals, because that way you are definitely going to use the food that you buy. It's so tempting when you get into the supermarket to just fill up your trolley with whatever you see around you, but it's important to have a game plan, try and take a shopping list with you. I find that really helps. What about you guys, John, Lucy, have you got any tips for budgeting? What did you do whilst you were at uni to make your loans last?
Yeah, so similar to Nora, I think I tended to try and buy local and also buy seasonal. I think buying kind of veg when it's in season. I mean, I think when I first went to uni, I think in September, October time, I'd be buying strawberries and wondering why they're about £4 a punnet. They're obviously not in season. I think as well, it again just plays back to that point of planning your meals. I tended to shop little and often because, again, exactly how Noor did, I'd go and do a big shop and then plans would change, or cook with housemates and things like that. So I think that'd be my tip for helping to save money on food shops.
So kind of try and stay a bit nimble, and if you've got one of those kind of unpredictable weeks where you're not sure what you're going to be doing, maybe don't go and buy a whole lot of food that could go off really, really quickly that you'll have to eat up in a hurry. That's a really good point. Jean, have you got any tips?
Yeah, I definitely echo that point on little and often. In my first year, I just had half a shelf in a fridge, as we were all, sharing one fridge in our flat. So I couldn't buy a lot at once, and if I tried to, then I'd end up wasting it. So kind of going every few days just to get what I needed, checking out the reduced section, and using that as the basis for some meals as well was a really good way of saving some money. Yeah,
that's a fantastic piece of advice. And I'd add to that as well, if you can invest in one thing ahead of next term, it's to get a cook pot, because I got one of these during my degree and it was a game changer. I was able to put loads of stuff in at the beginning of the day and cook it over the day on a low heat. And when I got back home after a day out, I would have a sauce or a stew or a soup ready for me as I got in the door, which was fantastic. So I definitely recommend checking out cook pots, because they were a real lifesaver for me. Now, talking about living with housemates, Jean, you mentioned it just there, that it can be quite challenging having to live with other people, possibly for the first time, who aren't your family. I'm assuming you guys all had flatmates at one point or another. So how did you avoid coming to blows with them over things like money? And also, it must be tricky because everyone's got to chip in with bills and household chores, but sometimes you get that one person who isn't pulling their weight or doing what they're supposed to do. So how did you guys deal with that? Lucy, perhaps you can tell us a bit about your experience sharing with housemates.
Yeah, so you are right. And I think it's part of kind of the baptism of fire of going to uni, is kind of working out, do you broach the subjects, do you not, all of that kind of stuff. I was quite lucky, to be honest, in that I was in a house with 8 other people in first and second year. And I think we'd all had it drummed into us by our parents that you don't want to spend too much on the electricity and the bills because they rack up really quickly and all that kind of stuff. So I just remember us being so stingy. I think in first or second year, and we were in Leeds, so the winters were quite cold. I'd come home from uni and would put on like gym leggings, trackies, another pair of trousers, about 4 jumpers and a dressing gown, and just sit there in my room like absolutely freezing. But and all my housemates are the exact same. We were just determined to not put the heating on. And then we eventually caved and put it on and realised it wasn't that bad. But as I say, I think we'd all just had it in our minds, don't put the bills on, it'd be really expensive kind of thing. But as I say, I think we were quite lucky, but I do think it's just important to have that conversation, because I equally have friends who their housemates were really happy to spend loads on bills and things like that, but scrimp elsewhere. So I think it's just about being open and honest, not being embarrassed about it, because everyone's in the same boat, really. But yeah, so no, it's part of the fun of it, and trying to work out other people's preferences, I guess.
Yeah, that's really good advice, to just talk to your housemates about the bills and make sure that everybody is on the same page. And if everybody's happy to put on their thermals and have the whole house really, really cold, then fair enough. That's really hardcore, I must say. I'm too much of a prima donna. I can put up with that for more than 5 minutes. But what about you guys, Noor and Jean? Have you got any advice about how to deal with housemates, particularly when it comes to money?
Yeah, I think for me personally, the biggest thing for us was just making sure that we were open and honest with each other. So the idea of like living with your friends is great, but then it's also thinking about the fact that these are the guys that you are living the majority of your time with. And if you are struggling and if you do need any support, just making sure that you get in touch and speak to them as well. And also making sure that if you're keeping like a little bit of a safety buffer. So I always made sure I had like a little bit of an emergency fund if there was a bit of an increase in the bills, just that everyone else in the house is aware of that. So if you can help and upskill your flatmates, if you are quite savvy already, then there's no reason why you can't share those top tips as well with them.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think Yeah, I think multiple accounts can really help you budget whilst you're at university. So if you have your main student account and you use that to pay all your essential expenses, it's also a good idea perhaps to have another account and you use that for your day-to-day spending, or maybe your going out fund. And then, as you mentioned, an emergency fund could be a real lifesaver in the situation that you just mentioned there. And I think lots of students find it really hard to save money, but if you can save any money, you are starting a really great habit that is going to stand you in good stead for the rest of your life, really. Jean, have you got any other tips that you want to share about how to deal with housemates?
Yeah, so in my second year onwards, we rented privately. So we'd got bills to pay and things like that. So one thing we did was have a wall tracker. So we'd kind of mark different tasks that needed doing, from cleaning to budgeting, all kind of pay into the same account. And that just meant that everyone was paying the same, everyone had the same responsibility. And at the end, any kind of leftover money, we just distributed equally between us. So everyone was paying the same at the same time. And there was no arguments to be had.
Brilliant. You absolutely nailed it. You really managed that situation very, very well. Chloe, have you got any tips about how you can try to avoid overspending? Because it's obviously a big challenge making that maintenance loan last the whole term.
It is, yeah. And I think there's two sides of it. So I would say that work out exactly how much money you have got when you're going to pay it, and divide it into a weekly budget. And that way, if you do end up overspending on one of the weeks, it's easier to try and make it up. Whereas at the end of the month, if you've overspent and then you're thinking, oh no, now I've got to claw it back over the next month. But one of the things that I would add to that is the NatWest account has loads of great features to help with, budgeting and splitting your expenditure into different categories, so you can see exactly what you're spending on items and highlight maybe where you need to cut back. So there's loads of great features there.
Great. Well, that's something for people to think about if they need a little bit of help with their spending as a student. But let's move on to the difficult part now. I'm going to get everybody to fess up to their biggest money mistake that they made when they were a student. Now, because that's a very mean question to ask, I'm going to go first. I would say my biggest mistake was that I did not take advantage of all the amazing student discounts that are available. And now I wish that I had those discounts available so that I could, save so much money. But guys, what are your biggest mistakes? Jean, I think you've got one to tell us about a laptop of yours.
Oh, yes. But in my final year, working on my dissertation, my laptop decided to break on me. Very kind of stressful moment of my degree, and then a laptop had broken. And I'd not kind of got money aside for those unexpected expenses. So I had to kind of quite quickly find a solution and get some extra shifts and get some money in. So very quickly after that, I learned the importance of kind of an emergency fund for when things go wrong.
Yeah, that is the stuff of nightmares. Wowie. Yeah. But you learned, but you learned the hard way, perhaps.
Learned the hard way.
Yeah. Lucy and Noor, what were your biggest money mistakes? Perhaps start with Lucy.
Yeah, so one springs to mind. I think it was in my final year, and probably, as Noor and John can relate to, I was in a bit of a flap about my dissertation and didn't think I'd have enough time to get it done and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, right, I'm not being productive here. I think I'll probably just go back home to my parents where there are no distractions, because I think I'd be working in the house and getting all distracted. So I thought, great, I'll go home for a couple of weeks. That will save some money too, because mum will cook for me. I'll be at home, all that kind of stuff. And I really screwed myself over because I hadn't booked my train back far enough in advance, and ended up having to pay an extortionate amount for a train from London to Leeds at the very last minute. So I learned my lesson the hard way there. And ever since, I've made sure, and again, a tip for everyone is to book trains as far enough in advance, or any form of travel if you get a mega bus or anything like that, because as I say, I learned the hard way having to fork out for a really expensive train ticket to get back to uni.
Yeah, that must have been a painful moment, definitely. And Noor, have you got any money mistakes that you want to fess up to?
Yeah, pretty atrocious one actually, Iona. So I in my first year, although before I was saying that I was really good at splitting my money up, that was something that I learned after this financial mistake. So I pretty much kept all of my money in the same account. And I thought I was saving for my holiday and my travels in the summer, but I wasn't. And I maxed out my overdraft and came back after the summer and had to work a ridiculous amount of hours before I went back to uni just to try and get that buffer back up. And the first thing I did after that was make sure that I had like separate pots for if I did want to go traveling again in the holidays, just to make sure that I actually could visually see the money in that separate pot rather than just spending it. So yeah, that I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Yeah, I think we can all relate, because as a student, you see that overdraft there and it's tempting to think of it as free money, but you are going to have to pay it back at some point, and that can be quite a difficult moment when you realize that. So it definitely pays to try and set some money aside for things like traveling, so that you're not having to just borrow more money. Great. Well, my last question to you guys is, what advice would you give to someone who is about to start uni today? No, if we can start with you.
I think the biggest tip that I learned was when I moved to uni, I thought that I had to be fiercely independent, and found it really hard to ask people if I needed any help or any support. So one thing that I really learned, and it was more towards my final year, it took me quite a long time to learn it, so I would definitely tell my younger self this, is establishing that support network, whether that is your family, your friends, your flatmates, your housemates, whether it's student support services, because all universities have really established wellbeing support and financial support as well. And even at the start, if you're not going through anything difficult, just knowing where those services are, so that if anything does go wrong, you know who to get in touch with. That would be the main bit. And also just have fun. It goes really, really quickly. So just enjoy it.
Yeah, smell the roses once in a while. Completely agree. Lucy, what's your one piece of advice?
Good advice, Nor. So I think I would say just enjoy it and just try and make the most of it. I think it's, again, I think you learn far more at uni than just your degree, actually, to be honest. I think it's everything else that you learn that actually really equips you for a career and working, and later in life, everything that we've talked about, all the budgeting tips and things like that. It's such a good opportunity going to uni to learn all of that. And I do think it will test you. I think there are times that felt really hard, but I do think everything makes you a more rounded person. So I think just enjoy it and make the most of it, to be honest.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Jean, what's your one piece of advice?
Yeah, I'd agree. So get involved with everything that you can. Take all of those opportunities. The time will fly so quickly, so just make the most of it. And it will all help you out in life. As we've all said, our degrees are quite different to what we're doing now. Yeah. So actually, all of those experiences will really help you as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. If you'd have said that I would be doing this right now when I was a student, I wouldn't have believed you. But I'm very glad to be here with you guys. And before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to ask Chloe about fraud, because you know, there's a perception, isn't there, that young people are very digitally savvy, so they're less likely to be defrauded. But is that true? And are there any particular scams that students need to watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely, Iona. I think, yes, younger people and students tend to be more savvy. However, it is one of the things that we need to stay alert of. Anyone can fall victim to a fraud or a scam, but it isn't to say that, you know, young people are immune to fraud or scams, and there are fraudsters who will target students. And some of the common things to look out for with students is things like house deposit scams. So if people are asking you to transfer money into an account for a flat deposit before you've seen the flat, that is something to be, you know, alert about. And there's also things like online shopping. So the likes of Facebook Marketplace, Depop, eBay and Gumtree. Just really keep your wits about you when using those sorts of sites, and always make sure you're paying with a debit or a credit card, because that will offer protection if, you know, things do go wrong.
That is all fantastic advice, and it will be so good if people come away from this session just being that little bit more vigilant when they're online or when they're doing any of their financial transactions, and not to rest on their laurels and think, oh, well, I know how to use the internet, it's all fine. But it's really important to just be careful and watch out. So great. Well, I think we're going to have our Q&A session now, Chloe. Is that right?
Yeah. So we've had some really great things so far. What we're going to do is just stop there. In the last 10 minutes of this Facebook Live, we're going to be answering some questions that have been coming in while we've been chatting, and also ones that have been sent via Instagram. So let's have a look at the first question. So the first question that we have is from Oscar Parsons, and he's saying, I'm having problems balancing out how much I spend on food and how much on accommodation. What sort of tips do we have for Oscar?
I would just say that the most important thing, Oscar, is to understand what your necessary expenses are. So you mentioned accommodation, but you might also have other things like travel and essential expenses for your course, like stationery and textbooks. It's really important to try and separate that from the amount that you can spend on food. And we've already been hearing some really great tips about how you can save money on food. But it's just about having a really firm grasp of how much your accommodation costs and trying to pay your bills by direct debit as soon as you receive your student loan. That means that you're not having to worry about that big unexpected expense at the end of the month. Just paying that as soon as you get your loan can really then help you budget for the rest of the month.
Yeah, and just going back to what I was saying earlier about the NatWest account, so there's a spending category overview on there, so you can see exactly what you're spending on eating out, travel, so that you can see where potentially you might need to cut back, and sometimes realising how much you actually spend on a coffee weekly can be a bit of a penny drop moment for people, so that's a good tip.
Yeah, make sure you get one of those flasks. That's my tip for saving money on coffee, definitely.
Okay, so let's look at the next question. So what do I do if I run out of money in my first term?
Well, all I would say is that if that happens, firstly, don't panic. Secondly, don't be tempted to borrow more money, because that's just going to create more problems in the long run. You could end up using expensive credit like payday loans, and that's just going to add to your problems. So resist the temptation to get into more debt, and speak to the money advisor at your university, because they'll be able to either point you in the direction of hardship funds, or they may even be able to point you to a debt charity if you've already got into debt and you're struggling to pay that back. So the main message is you don't have to struggle alone. Go and speak to somebody at your university, and they should point you in the direction of further help. And you may also qualify for certain benefits. If you're in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, you can get an education maintenance allowance, and you might also qualify for universal credit, housing benefit, that sort of thing. So check out the Citizens Advice website to get more information on that.
Brilliant, thanks, Iona. And the last question is coming from Robert. So is it too late to apply for a student loan?
The answer is no, Robert, but you better get your skates on, because it will take up to 6 weeks for your application to be processed. And in the meantime, you may well be starting your course and needing the money. So you can apply for student funding up to 9 months after the start of your course. So you do have some time, but you obviously don't want to start your course and not have any money to fund that first term. So I'd get that application made as soon as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. So I hope watching today has been useful and you've picked up a few tips for how to manage your money better at university, and also how to cook some tastier, cheaper meals, pesto pasta, remember that one. A huge thank you to our grads, so Noor, Jean and Lucy, for providing some really, really great advice. And of course, thank you to you as well, Iona. If you have any more questions at all, then feel free to post your comments and questions below and we will get back to you. Thank you all so much for joining, and if you are starting uni this September, then good luck and have fun.